The History of Bilingual Education by Lauren Yates. The first event on my timeline is in 1954 with the Brown versus Board of Education. In 1954, the Justices of the United States Supreme Court ruled unanimously that racial segregation of children in public schools was unconstitutional in the landmark case of Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka. This case stemmed from Plessy versus Ferguson Supreme Court case, which in 1896 ruled that racially segregated public facilities were legal as long as the facilities for blacks and whites were equal. The Brown versus Board of Education ruling helped to establish that separate but equal educational facilities were not really equal at all. For ELLs, this court ruling resulted in the claim that equal treatment for ELLs meant submersion in mainstream classrooms which were designed for English proficient students, leaving ELLs with unequal opportunities to succeed. Next is the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which ended segregation in public places and banned discrimination on basis of race, gender, ethnicity, and religion. This act forbid discrimination on the basis of natural origin, but at this point in time, federal authorities focused their attentions on the African American community, and de facto and de jure segregation still existed for Mexican American children in many areas of the country. This act impacted the education of ELLs because it set precedent for providing equal opportunities for them and was the basis for many other later laws regarding education of bilingual students. Next is the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. In 1965, President Lyndon B. Johnson passed the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which funded primary and secondary education and emphasized equal access to education. This law was instrumental in improving the schooling and education of English language learners. Next is the Bilingual Education Act in Title VII. In 1968, President LBJ signed the Bilingual Education Act, signaling the government's first commitment to assist students with limited English skills. It is also known as Title VII of ESEA, and this act authorized various resources to support educational programs, train teachers, develop instructional materials, and encourage parents to be more involved in their students' schooling. This impacted the education of ELLs because by promoting the more advanced and distinguished education of students not fluent in English. Next is in 1969, when Texas decriminalized teaching in languages other than English, and this impacted the learning and education of ELLs by providing them more opportunities to learn and become proficient in the English language, because teachers could now incorporate the students' native languages into their education. In 1974, there was Serna versus Portales Municipal Schools, a court case that led to the upholding of the right to bilingual education for Mexican American children. This case impacted English language learners because it made it so they could not be discriminated against based on their surname, and it provided more opportunities for success and new programs for ELL students. Next is another one in 1974, when Lau versus Nichols case outlaws sink or swim. In 1974, the continued case of Lau versus Nichols outlawed the sink or swim method, which promoted equal education by simply providing everyone the same resources and opportunities regardless of English proficiency. Sink or swim was ruled to be unequal, and federal authorities realized that simply providing the same exact opportunities for all students was not really equal at all. And this impacted ELLs because the government finally began to understand the importance of bilingual education and worked towards advancing it for bilingual students. Next is also in 1974, with the Equal Opportunities Act being signed into law. This made the Lau regulations part of the U.S. Code and this act impacted the education of ELLs because it provided statutes regarding the equal opportunities for them in the public school system. In 1978, the Bilingual Education Act was reauthorized and banned language funding, and funding to transitional programs for ELLs was restricted. This reauthorization was one of many, although this specific instance caused a setback for the ELL community. It impacted ELL education by restricting funds for programs for ELLs and resisting transitional programs. In 1984, the Bilingual Education Act was again reauthorized. This time, however, the act was reauthorized to distribute moderate funding, allowing developmental bilingual and all English programs. This reauthorization impacted the education of ELLs because it allowed schools to receive the funding necessary to properly educate students not proficient in English and fund the proper programs to ensure a well-rounded and equal educational experience. And my sources were The Evolution of Federal Policy, Crawford, Chapter 5.